All right, and now hopefully you can see my slides as well. So, first of all, fantastic to be here. Thank you so much for being invited. Truly wonderful to see everybody. I'm going to talk about why mental health is the tech industry's biggest problem and how to solve it. Now, before we get started, I actually want to do something that you probably haven't seen very many speakers do. Now, we're going to talk about some pretty difficult topics here. We're going to talk about things like substance abuse and suicide and self-harm. So if you are in any way triggered by any of those topics, there's plenty of other rooms available. Maybe slide over to another one of those rooms. And I know that's a very weird thing for a speaker to say. Speakers generally want as many people in the audience as they can possibly get, but these are difficult topics. So now is your chance to just leave this room and go to another one if those topics are going to trigger you in any way, shape, or form. So given that I've padded for a few seconds and given you the opportunity to decide whether to stay or whether to go, let's get started. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen me do the old version of this speech or not. It's been available online for a little while, but I've updated it quite a bit. So you're seeing the very latest and greatest version of it. When I first did this speech, I wanted to be very clear about the reasons why founders and startup workers in particular are having much more problems, so many more problems than you would get if you were, say, a regular citizen. Let's go through those, recap those. Now, when you're a founder, when you're a startup worker, there is a huge amount of pressure on you. That pressure comes from lots of different places. First of all, we are taking other people's money usually to help us fund these. I mean, if you're not, then of course there's a pressure in you funding it yourself. But typically you'll go out initially probably to friends and family. Friends and family do actually want their money back at some point. I hate to tell you that. So that's a little bit of pressure. But if you go to an angel investor or a venture capitalist, a VC, they're going to want a lot more than just their money back. VCs are looking for 10 times their money back. They're looking to make an investment in you. That's a lot of pressure. And taking other people's money is step number one. Just in the way that we've set up the startup industry. Maybe that will change, especially with the global pandemic. People, I think, in startup world are realizing that funding is starting to dry up and, they have to actually create sustainable businesses, but that's another topic for another day. When you've got that money, you then have to go and use it. And one of the ways that we use it, and always the biggest number on the profit and loss, is to employ people. You have to hire staff. You've got to get those designers, developers, administration people, everybody else that you need within your team, your executives. They have to come on board, and that's what the money is for, as well as marketing and sales and support and everything else. But big chunk of the money is there to help you take that incredible idea you've got, that passion that you have for solving a problem in the world, whether it be through an app or a website, some kind of product or service or an event, and you need to spend that money on people. That means you're now responsible for those people. You're responsible for the roofs over their heads, maybe the food on their table, maybe the food on their children's table. That's what that money's for. So you now are responsible, and that's a huge amount of pressure. Then we have the problem of hard work. The startup industry is absolutely rife with people who believe that you need to fail fast, that you need to get your product, your service out there as quickly as is humanly possible. And so we've got into this culture of hustle and grind, hustle and grind, hustle and grind all the time. There's a problem with that. And the problem is that we burn out. It's quite common for us to see people in the startup world working 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, because we as an industry and as a society have told them that that is what is needed. And so we hustle, we grind, and we push harder and harder all the time. We also have people out there who are consistently and continuously promoting this idea of hustle and grind through their influential videos. And that's a problem, because there are other ways to work. There are other ways to get the results that you need to. There's other ways to transfer your passion into a product or service that is going to make a difference in this world. It doesn't have to be that 7 days a week, 14 hours a day environment, but we put that amount of pressure on ourselves. We then have the problem of self-prescription. Self-prescription is where you've come up with a brilliant idea. Maybe you're incredibly brilliant technically, but because of your ego, you make yourself the CEO of the company and not the CTO of the company, or not the product lead. And that causes its own issues, because there are very few people that have the kind of brain that can do the technical side and do the CEO side of the business at the same time. It's an entirely different set of skills. Being a CEO is incredibly different and requires an incredibly different mind to being a CTO or a product lead. So we have this problem because, of course, people are constantly then finding that they're failing quite often. We'll talk about failure later, but failing quite often, they're struggling because they've not had to do this before. It becomes very difficult for them. And then we have social media. Now, social media is an interesting thing, and it's could do an entire speech just on social media and how it affects our mental health. Most people don't post on social media what is really happening to them. Most people post their perfectly edited lives, and there's a problem with that. When you're only posting the good things, especially if you're worried that your investment partners are going to look at it, and if you put any kind of realism into it, they're going to worry that you're maybe not the right person, or maybe they've put their investment in the wrong place. But you're essentially lying when you post only your perfectly edited lives to social media. And also, when you're scrolling through everybody else's social media and all you see is their perfectly edited lives, that actually has an effect on your mental health too. So we have all of these pressure points, and there's many more than that, but that's the reason why founders and startup workers are under so much more pressure than regular citizens. So I ran a survey. The study actually covered over 3,000 people in the technology industry, everyone from founders to startup workers to VCs to tech journalists, anyone that would respond to that survey. It was done anonymously. The demographics of that survey were kept incredibly wide because I did not want to be able to identify any individual, specifically because when I first seeded this survey and sent it out to people, of course I sent it out to my network, and a lot of my network are my friends, and I did not want to be able to identify their responses. Out of a score of 100, the current stress levels across all of those people are 72. That's incredibly high. And I wanted to know if those stress levels were basically because of work or whether it was because of personal issues. And 55% of those people said that it was because of work or mostly work. Only 2% said that it was personal or mostly personal. The rest were a mixture of the two in the middle. So it's clear to us that the work, the job of being in a startup in any way, shape or form, or being in this technology industry in any way, is having a deep effect on our stress levels right now. So how do we deal with those stress levels? Well, people were asked to self-report in terms of what they use to cope with stress. Predominantly, the number one was alcohol, large amounts of alcohol, in fact. Alcohol is definitely the number one coping mechanism for the stresses and strains of being involved in a startup. Second was marijuana. Third was prescription drugs. Now, the problem with prescription drugs is if you're taking anti-anxiety drugs or antidepressant drugs, I don't know if you've ever read the side effects leaflet that comes with those drugs, but it's quite heinous. Every single anti-anxiety and antidepressant drug actually has listed as one of the side effects that it may cause anxiety and may cause depression. In fact, many of them go as far as saying may cause suicidal thoughts. So clearly, if we can find a more natural way to deal with these things rather than taking prescription drugs, that would be much, much healthier for all of us, because the prescription drugs you're taking for depression or anxiety might be causing more depression or anxiety. Cocaine was next on the list, and then cigarettes were next on the list. Now, when I ask people in a survey, and I used to run VentureBeat's research arm, one of the things that we have within research is if you ask people to self-report, they quite often lie, especially if it's a very emotive question. But I wanted to know if people were taking these substances to excess. And if you ask somebody a question like that and they're self-reporting, they're probably, the results are going to be underplayed. And yet 27% of people said that they were taking these substances to excess in order to be able to deal with the stresses and strains of being in the startup world. That's pretty scary because the actual number is likely to be higher thanks to the fact that it's self-reported. So why am I so passionate about this subject? Why do I try to take this all over the world? I mean, I take it to tech stages all over the world. Obviously right now, since we're isolated, you know, it's important for me to get this message out to as many online audiences as possible. Well, as well as being, you know, having gone through my own dark times within the tech industry, and I've been in the tech industry for a very, very long time, back when we used to call it software houses instead of startups. You know, I've been through that myself, but in addition, I have had a significant number of friends who I have lost to suicide in this industry. So in 2018, for example, I lost 11 friends to suicide in the tech industry, one every single month except December. Thankfully, it slowed down a little bit in 2019, but I still lost friends to suicide in 2019. So it's important for us to talk about these subjects. The fact that we don't talk about this very openly in our industry is also a problem, because when people have an issue, because we're not talking about it, they don't feel like they can open up and talk about it with other people. In fact, if we look at the data, startup people generally have 2 times more suicidal thoughts than regular citizens. They're 3 times more likely to have substance abuse issues than regular citizens. And this one might have some kind of causality issue, but they're 10 times more likely to have bipolar disorder and other similar disorders than regular citizens. You could argue that you might need to be bipolar to found a startup, but that's another separate subject as well. And when I looked at my audience and I said, well, you know, I wonder if I'm an outlier, or I wonder if I've lost so many people because it's just an outlier situation. Turns out that 16% of the people that responded to this study have lost somebody because of suicide in the tech industry. And on average, they've lost 3 people each. If you take the view that over 3,000 respondents is significant from a statistical standpoint, and apply that to the entire landscape of people in the tech industry right now, 16% losing 3 people each is a lot of people. It's incredibly significant. So we need to do something about this. There is one other issue, and the other issue is not an obvious one. I was doing lots of research on the reasons why we have these problems, and beyond things like taking other people's money and self-prescription and hustle and grind attitude, social media, all of these things I discussed before, we also have an issue that has got decades of research behind it, but we've largely forgotten it. It's been talked about, but kind of put away. Now, people who have high IQs, who would be typically called gifted individuals, they have these things that are called overexcitables that start when they're children and can go on into adulthood. There are 5 major overexcitables. The first overexcitable is the ability to make friends and connections much more readily and easily than people with average IQs, regular IQs. That sounds great. But it also adds to the kind of information overload that a lot of people feel, because of course you're managing lots of different connections all of the time, and there's a lot of energy going into that. It certainly is a world that suits extroverts more than it does introverts, but people with high IQs, gifted individuals, certainly find it a lot easier to network with larger amounts of people than regular people do. And as a response to that, it can be overwhelming. People who are gifted individuals tend to be able to work harder and faster than others. Now, interestingly, this is quite often pathologized and diagnosed as ADD and ADHD. It may be that you've been diagnosed with ADHD and you don't actually have ADHD. You might have this overexcitable. And again, as a result, a lot of people are asked, especially in the United States, to take drugs to deal with ADHD. And of course, they come with side effects, including things like may cause anxiety. So again, with this particular overexcitable, it sounds great to be able to do more and work faster and work harder than other people. But of course, that means that you could burn out faster and harder than other people too. People with high IQs tend to be able to, they tend to have much greater senses than other people, and every single sense. Now that's great, except for the fact that when you have this heightened sense, and that's every single sense, you can actually look around and think of the world as actually quite a mundane place usually. And some of the reason why people turn to things like alcohol and drugs is because they're trying to make the world a much more interesting place for themselves, because otherwise it would just be too mundane and boring. And of course, that's when we can start down the road of getting into substance abuse issues and doing too much of that. People with high IQs tend to be able to take on information in much higher volumes and faster than other people. And of course, that then contributes again to the same information overload situation that causes people to have problems, and that contributes to burnout also. And then finally, the last overexcitable is basically more vivid dreams and imagination than other people, which sounds beautiful and wonderful. But of course, our dreams are a reflection of the images that our brain wants to get rid of. And if you're in a bad environment where you have negative energy around you all the time, those dreams can quickly turn into nightmares, and they can have a significant impact on you when you're awake. So we have these 5 overexcitables, and typically people will have 1 or 2 or 3 of those. Personally, I actually have had to come up with coping mechanisms for all 5 of them, because I found out that through my research that I exhibit all 5 of these. But there are lots of different coping mechanisms that can be put in place to deal with them. The last one is, and we're all going to hopefully relate to this right now, but even when there isn't a global pandemic, even when we don't have to self-isolate or be in quarantine, for a lot of founders, especially solopreneurs, people that are working with remote teams, loneliness is a terrible thing. And so we have to deal also with loneliness as our final pressure point. It's something that just adds that extra pressure on top of everything else that we've already talked about. All right, so take a breath. That's the bad news. And it's good to get that all out there in the open, because hopefully if you understand the reasons why you might be feeling this way and why your mental health is on the edge, at least you're now armed and fully aware. So we take a breath, and now let's get into what are the coping mechanisms? How do we actually deal with this and make sure we stay on the right side of the tracks? Well, the first one, and although it may seem difficult to do that right now in the middle of the pandemic, is to get out into nature. And in most countries, even if you're isolated and being ordered to stay at home, you are allowed to go out once a day for exercise and to get essentials. Even if the nature that's near you is just a small park, or you get to walk down beside the river before you go to your supermarket, go do it. Get into nature, get into your back garden, and go outside and breathe and look at the trees and the sun and just reconnect. Nature really is incredible in terms of being able to help you manage your stress levels, help you manage your mood and improve your mood. So getting out into nature is deeply important, and you really should do it as often as possible. When we do get back to our office environments, remember that it is possible to take your office outside. We can get access to all of these little Mi-Fi boxes that give you Wi-Fi and you can connect a few devices to them. I promise you that if you take your team out into the park with a Mi-Fi box and you do a brainstorming session out there, it's going to be so much more inventive and creative and inspired than the sessions that you do within the same beige four walls with a little bit of steel and a little bit of glass. Brainstorming out in nature is so much more powerful than doing it inside an office. So when we get a chance to do that again, take advantage of that. Exercise is super important. You really need to do something that makes you sweat every single day. And when you exercise or when you do any form of play, and we'll talk about play a little bit more in a moment, but exercise is super important. Not only does it make you sweat, but just the act of exercise releases all sorts of proteins and neurotransmitters that will improve your mood and that will help you to manage your stress. And of course, it will keep you physically fit too. And, physical fitness and mental fitness go hand in hand with each other. One of the things I wish that we would do is that quite often founders and CEOs and other executives, they become kind of like a therapist for their company. And when people come to you, anybody with a problem, they're probably going to come to you with it. And you're not necessarily trained to deal with that or have the wherewithal to deal with that. And so I suggest that all executives get either into the office when we can return or online, a therapist that can be available for their staff on a no questions asked, open door and confidential policy. We should be doing that, and we should be treating hiring a therapist the same way as we treat hiring a personal trainer. If you get a personal trainer, your friends say to you, hey, that's great, that's awesome. If they're any good, can I have a referral? If you get a therapist, your friends say, why? What's wrong with you? We need to change that narrative. Why don't we just say the same thing as we say for when we have a physical trainer that we hire? Meditation is incredibly important. And in fact, it's changed my life immeasurably and quite possibly saved it. Now, a lot of people have a problem with meditation because they say, meditation? I can't clear my mind. I've tried it. I can't clear my mind. Meditation is not about clearing your mind. That's impossible. I don't know a human on the planet that can do that. These are not even the most powerful computers we've ever had. They're much more than that. Our brains are quantum devices. It's impossible to clear your mind. But meditation isn't that. Meditation is the process of focusing on your breath and taking that breath into your body and then focusing on it going out of your body. And that creates a slice of time in front of you that's maybe about 6 or 7 seconds long. Within that slice of time, something will happen. You'll have a thought. You'll hear a sound. You'll get a flash of light. And even if your eyes are closed, you'll recognize that. You'll maybe smell something, or someone will touch you, or you'll feel a breeze against your face. Whatever it is, meditation is the practice of recognizing that for what it is and letting it pass, because the next slice of time is just about to come. It's the constant practice of recognition and passing that actually changes the neurons in your brain over time. It gets you into a place where you're focused on what is happening now, and you're not stressing or worrying about things that have happened because you can't change them. You're not stressing or worrying about things that are going to happen because you can't control them. As a result, it actually helps you with your work because you can 100% laser focus, as long as you practice this enough every day, on what is happening right in front of you. I've found that it allows me to work faster and more accurately and in a more inspired way without making mistakes, so fewer mistakes. And it allows me to do that because I'm laser focused on what's happening right in front of me. Nutrition is incredibly important. We quite often ignore this when it comes to stress management. Nutrition, there's lots of different opinions on nutrition, but what I've discovered through both research and also experimentation on myself is that the slow carb diet that Tim Ferriss wrote about in The 4-Hour Body and the ketogenic diet, which sounds like a fatty thing, but actually It was created in the 1920s to help kids with neurological issues. Both of those diets seem to be very good in terms of helping you with your thought processes, helping you to make sure you're putting the right nutrients in your body. If all you do is stop eating processed foods and reduce your sugar intake and focus on whole foods, you'll find that it will have an effect on the way that your mind works and the things that you do. And then, of course, there's play and being childlike. You know, when we grow up, we're told very much to put away our childish things and to be an adult. And I've got to tell you, it's the worst advice possible. Play, enjoy yourself, be a child. Like whether that's, you know, making music, even if you're not a musician, or singing, or painting, drawing, playing games, you know, whatever it is, do that. And the way I work is that, you know, I have a routine. I wake up, I meditate, I make my bed because that's a small win. I have breakfast because I need fuel. And then I do something enjoyable before I do my work session. Then when I've done my work, I do something enjoyable again and I have fun. And when you have fun, when you play, when you're enjoying yourself, it actually releases a protein called BDNF. And what that does is acts like a reset for your brain and helps you to think more clearly. The other thing that's interesting about play is when you play, your brain is actually, if you have planned out the work that you need to do, so I do that the day before, but when you play, your brain subconsciously plans the next piece of work so that when you start that piece of work, you have got very much warm-up time. You already know what you're supposed to be doing and you just get straight into it. So again, it optimizes your workday. Play is the answer to optimizing your workday, not sitting in front of the computer for 12 hours a day, because if you do that, your brain gets muddy very, very quickly, and by sort of 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you're creating very uninspired, non-creative work that has lots of mistakes. You probably have to redo it all the next day. The other thing is we need to talk to each other more in this industry. We need to say hello. We need to ask people how they are. If you say, "How are you?" to your friend and they say, "Oh, I'm fine," say, "Okay, that's the kind of answer you'd give a stranger. I'm your friend. How are you really?" And then have 2 ears and 1 mouth and use them in that proportion. Let people tell you how they really are. And, you know, I'm super inspired by my friend Sam Fiorella. Sam unfortunately lost his son to suicide whilst he was in college. And instead of curling up in a ball in a dark room and rocking backwards and forwards, Sam went ahead and did something incredibly inspirational. It's inspiring to me for sure. He created the Lucas Fiorella Foundation and this program called Yellow is for Hello. And with Yellow is for Hello, what he did is put bright yellow benches in campuses all across Canada and now across the United States. And I'm seeing them pop up elsewhere as well. The idea is simple. If somebody's sitting on that yellow bench, it means they want you to go and sit with them and just say hello and have a conversation. It's an incredibly powerful thing for us to do for each other. Again, if we don't talk about these tough issues with each other, then we don't feel like we can talk about them with each other. And of course, I think we all know that when you look at the gender splits in suicide rates across the world, that men are affected more than women, and that's because men have a tougher time being vulnerable and opening up than women do. So men, be vulnerable. Like, just don't worry about showing your emotion. I know that you've been told to man up all your life, but that's not the answer, and that's the reason why people are having so many issues and problems. And then, you know, surround yourself with good people. It's true that you become the product of the 5 people that are closest to you at any point in your life. So make sure the people around you are good people and inspiring people. And, you know, each one can teach you something different. It's people that you can bounce ideas off, people that you can tell your worries to. Make sure they're around you because they will help lift you up. You will help lift them up. And together we can all go ahead and make a difference to each other. And if you're trying to convince your investors that this is a good idea, well, let's be brutal about this. In terms of working smarter, not harder, in terms of all of these coping mechanisms, in terms of splitting up your workday and not just going at it all the time and hustling and grinding, it's really clear to me that, you know, if you explain this to an investor in investors' terms, I would hope they would get it. And I've seen a lot of VCs who do understand that smart work is better than hard work. But for those who don't, remember this one fact: nothing will kill your investment faster than if the founder kills themselves. Let's support working smart, not working hard all the time. Because after all, you are all here. I am very happy that you're all here. I want you to stay here. You are creating incredible products, services, events, apps. You are finding a passion. You're going out there. You're trying to solve real problems. So let's use all of these coping mechanisms. Let's look after each other. Let's support each other. Let's listen to each other to make sure that we all stay here, because then we can go out there and do incredible things together. Thank you so much for listening to me. Because of the nature of this particular kind of session, it isn't one of those ones where I often get a lot of questions afterwards, or that it's appropriate to ask questions in a public environment. But you can find me at The Real SJR online, and I'm more than happy for you to ask me any questions that you have privately. You can also get me on stewartrogers.me, and you can write to me directly from there. Thank you so much for having me on the event today. So many incredible speakers, and it's a real honor to be amongst so many luminaries. And I hope everyone has an amazing rest of the Global Arm Conference.